All right, so this is the first kind of module. We're going to talk about the normal scalars, or which are the waveforms. This is extremely important. You want to know what you're looking at, and you want to know what the normal ones look like, because you want to know when something's abnormal, and then you can troubleshoot it. All right. So remember that our two main control variables, which is to say the two main ways by which our patients receive flow, is through pressure and volume. And we're really going to concentrate on that, since those are sort of the the traditional modes that most people will be seeing. Okay, maybe later we'll do something on APRV. I'm hearing some fairly possibly good results for COVID patients on this. In any case, but let's talk about volume control and pressure control before we look at actual the waveforms. Okay, we have volume, pressure, flow, and time. Inspiratory time. Okay. So in these modes, there are always some independent variables and some dependent variables. That is to say that we set something, and those are independent, and then other things are dependent based on what we set. All right. So we're going to go through volume control first. All right. We're going to talk about what we set. So what do we set in volume control? Well, we set the volume. All right. Do we set the pressure? No, we don't set the pressure. We set the flow? Yes, we set the flow. Do we set the inspiratory time? Not traditionally, okay? There are some events where you can do that, but for the most part, in volume control, traditionally you set volume and flow. In pressure control, do we set the volume? No. Do we set the pressure? Yes. All right, do we set the flow? No. All right, and do we set the time? Yes. So these are the main, differences. Is essentially in pressure control, we set volume and flow. In volume control, we set volume and flow. In pressure control, we set pressure, and we determine the inspiratory time. All right. So first, I want to start out with pressure control. Pressure control. All right. First, it's important to know what waveforms you're looking at. All right. So traditionally, events have three waveforms. We're going to look at the top two because they're most important. All right. At the top, you have a pressure curve and you have a flow curve. Down here, you have a volume curve. All right. We're going to leave that off for now. We'll talk about a couple of things a little bit later, which is important to see in that. But these are the main things to talk about. All right. So with pressure control, first one of these curves again are independent. All right, and the other one is dependent. All right. So we're going to talk about, let's say, pressure control. All right. We're going to set it at pressure support is 15. Let's say the respiratory rate is 10. All right. Respiratory rate is 10. All right. We're going to do a PEEP of 5. All right. And FiO2, doesn't matter as far as the waveforms go. So let's talk about first, it's always good to draw the independent curve. So which one is going to be independent? All right. So in pressure control, the pressure curve is independent. That is to say that we set the parameters. So what happens? Let's say we're here. We're at the end of expiration. What's going on at the end of expiration? Well, what is the pressure the vent is set? Pressure is 5. All right, so we'll say this is 5. All right, so here's our vent. The vent has a pressure of 5. All right, and right here, let's say it goes to inspiration. Again, these patients are paralyzed. So what does the vent do right at the beginning of inspiration? What happens to the pressure? All right, the pressure is set for 15. Boom, it goes up. Now in some vents, most vents, the 15 you said is the difference is above the PEEP. So in most vents, this will go to 20. All right, what happens with the pressure? Well, it stays there. How long does it stay there? Well, we have a respiratory rate of 10. Sorry, I should have said we have an I time of 1 second. All right, so if we have a respiratory rate of 10 and I time of 1 second, that means inspiration lasts for 1 second. There's 10 a minute. So we have inspiration with 1 second and expiration is 5 seconds. All right, so that's our I to E ratio. All right, so for 1 second, it holds the pressure up that high. And then what happens at the end of 1 second? Boom, it drops down. Okay, and then what happens? Well, during expiration, which lasts for 5 seconds, it stays at PEEP. What happens on the next breath? Boom, holds the pressure down. All right, this is obviously not growing the scale, but this is what the pressure curve looks like, the normal scalar of pressure control. All right, Now let's look at the flow curve and start thinking about what the flow would look like in a pressure-controlled breath. All right, what's the flow here? Well, the flow is 0. You're at the end of expiration, there's no flow. Flow doesn't occur till inspiration. At what point, so now the valve opens and the pressure of the vent goes up to 20, all right? At what point do you think you'll have maximum flow? Well, right at the beginning of the breath, because the difference between the ventilator and the alveoli are the greatest. So boom, flow goes up to its maximum point, all right? And now try to think of what happens within the patient's lung now that you have the valve open and you have a pressure that's high on the vent and much higher than your alveolar pressure. Well, they'll start to equilibrate, and initially they'll equilibrate, the flow will be the fastest at the beginning, and then we'll slowly go down. All right? Now, down here, why is the flow less than it is here? Well, here, the difference between the vent, which is 20, and now your pressures inside the lung are a lot closer, so the flow is a lot less. So this is generally, what it will look like, all right? What will the expiratory curve look like? When will expiration be the fastest, the expiratory flow? Well, same thing at the very beginning, all right? When the difference now between the vent, which is now set at a PEEP of 5, and your alveolar pressure or your airway pressure are the highest, all right? So boom. And that's generally what a pressure curve looks like, all right? So it's very important that you understand these overall shapes, because then we'll talk about when you have changes in this. What does it mean when it's going like this? Sometimes you look and you see things going like this. What does that mean? Why is it happening? For now, the most important thing, and this truly is extremely important, is to know your normal scalars. So, take a moment and just, you should be able to look at a ventilator across the room and know if it's a pressure-controlled mode, if the control variable is pressure or the control variable is volume. So take a moment. If I ask you, just draw a curve quickly. At some point you should be able to say, okay, what is this is pressure flow, pressure control, and just think, boom. All right. What is this? Oh, boom. Okay. And it's very important that, this is obviously some issue, but this is, what you want to be able to do. Okay. All right. So now we're going to change this. And we're going to see what volume control looks like. All right. So same thing. We have a pressure curve. All right. And we have a flow curve. All right. So let's say that we have volume control. Tidal volume is 500. Respiratory rate 10, PEEP of 5. Remember I said we set the flow. Let's say the flow is 30 liters a minute. All right, so let's try to think what these curves will look like, because these are the curves you will see on your vent if you put someone on volume control and you want to know what they look like, so that in the next section, when we talk about pulmonary mechanics, you can see if anything is different than normal and start to make judgment about what's going on in your patient's lungs. And then you can start talking about, okay, what is the patient-ventilator interaction? Now, if we're talking about paralyzed patients, we can talk later about the patient-ventilator interaction, but just to get ahead, in a paralyzed patient, we are essentially, taking their own respiratory drive out of it. They may still have a respiratory drive, but we are paralyzing their diaphragm. So essentially, the patient-ventilator interaction is that the ventilator is now doing all the work. Again, that's a give or take. When you paralyze someone, you have decided that my priority is that there will be no dysynchrony, and that comes at the cost of the patient doing no work. All right, and this all depends on what your priorities are. Which is the last section. So that's kind of where we're going and where we're heading. Back to the volume control, all right? Remember, there's one independent and one dependent. What I say that we set, all right? I said that we set the volume and we set the flow, all right? So this, the flow is gonna be set, and this is gonna be our independent curve, all right? So same thing, let's talk about what this curve would look like, all right? So it's expiration, what's the flow? 0, all right, in a healthy paralyzed lung, all right? Let's say right here is the valve opens and it's inspiration. Try to think what this would look like. I said we set a flow. We set a flow which is constant, all right? So what happens? Well, boom, we set a flow, all right? Now what happened? That flow stays the same until it reaches its mark. So let's say we have 30 liters a minute. If we're essentially giving 30 liters a minute, how much are we giving a second? We're giving 0.5 liters a second. All right, all right, which is 30 divided by 60. All right, 60 seconds. So if it's a 60, it's 30.5 liters per second. All right. So essentially, it's going to give the flow at 30 liters a minute for how long? Well, 1 second, because you told it to give it until you can reach 500 cc's, which is 0.5 liters. All right. What happens then? Flow stops. All right. Now expiration starts. What's expiration going to look like? When's the flow maximal? Well, right at the beginning. All right. So it's going to be the same. All right. This is what a volume control, a standard volume control breath looks like. Okay. These are all 1 second. Again, if you had a respiratory rate of 10, that means these would be 5 seconds, all right? Because each cycle is 6 seconds, all right? That means your I to E ratio is 1 to 5, all right? So now, let's go on and see what the pressure curve is. Now this is a dependent curve, all right? We don't set this, all right? So what happens if, what's the pressure curve initially? Is it down here? No, because your peak is 5, all right? So it starts here, all right? Inspiration, the valve opens and we're pushing air in, okay? Or we're pushing flow in. So I will tell you that initially there's a little blip, and we'll talk about the significance of that later, but this blip is overcoming the airway resistance, all right? And then in a normal lung, as you push air in, just imagine the vent is pushing air in, and what you're seeing is the pressure of the vent, okay? And as the vent pushes more pressure in, or more flow in, it's got to increase its pressure to get that flow in. So as you push flow in steadily, all right, it's going to go up like that, all right? And then what happens here? At the end of inspiration, boom, it stops pushing flow, all right? And the pressure of the vent goes back to peak. All right? And this is what the normal scalars of a volume control breath, a standard volume control breath look like, okay? And it's very important to understand. Later we can talk about plateau pressure, because that is very important. And again, what is this? This is your peak inspiratory pressure, which you can see on the vent, which is the maximum pressure the vent has to provide in order to push that flow that you set into the lung, okay? Right there. When we talk about a plateau pressure, we'll talk about more when we talk about pulmonary mechanics, but essentially that is an end inspiratory hold. And if you were to hold this here, so instead, this would look like this, all right? Right here you have an end inspiratory hold. You would see that rather than this would drop like that, all right? And then this would be your plateau pressure, and this hold allows time for the air to equilibrate, and so you can actually throughout your alveoli, and then you can actually see what your your alveolar pressure is, or your plateau pressure. All right, we'll talk about that more later. This is what's most important, that you absolutely understand these normal scalars. Okay, so and part of it is just understanding what is going on with the vent. All right, so again, if we had pressure control and volume control, and we just want to quickly write, and when this is not to scale, you know, what do these normal scalars look like? All right, so just think in your mind, you know, this is pressure, flow, pressure, flow. All right, what are these gonna look like? Pressure control, again, you start your PEEP, you know, and will generally look like this, all right? The flow curve will, for the most part, look like this, all right? What's volume control? Well, let's start with the independent curve, all right? All right, what is this gonna look like? None of this is drawn to scale, but you get the point. Oops. All right, so this is very important. You know, when I first learned about this, the people who were teaching me said, draw this 100 times, all right? So draw this out so you get it, all right? Because then you will see changes in all of these things, all right? And that will give you clues to what's going on with your lung, what's going on with your vent, something going on with your tubing, something be going on with the lungs. And so, but the basis of all of this is understanding what the normal scalars look like. You know, if you understand that, then you can even, you know, critique some of my drawings here, you know, and say, hey, this doesn't really look quite normal, you know, it seems like it should be like that, but, or why is this? Why is the resistance higher here than on this breath? You know, that doesn't make sense. But all this is just really about understanding what the normal scalars look like. We can quickly go through the volume curves, which are on the bottom. You know, and actually it's more like this, you know, but if you can imagine the volume, what do you think the volume curve is gonna look like? And think about what's going on with the vent as your flow goes in, right? So the flow is initially the highest and then it goes lower. So the volume's initially going up the most, you know, and then here the volume's going lower, all right? You know, and this is not drawn to scale, but you know, that's generally going to look like, as opposed to this. Now here the flow is going in at a constant rate, you know, so you should see more, you know, of a mountain. Oh, this should be more of a mountaintop, you know, more going up, and then like that. You know, obviously these would match, all right? But these are the most important, all right? So really, you know, before you go on to the next section, just work on these, understand these. You know, I could give you, you know, a problem, which I would suggest you do at home, all right? Stop the video and do it, you know, and see if yours match, all right? And we'll do two. Let's say we have a, you know, a volume control and a pressure control. You know, try to draw out these waveforms, okay? So let's say we have volume control at 500 cc's, you know, PEEP is 10. Actually, you should usually want to put your ventilatory parameters together. So let's say respiratory rate of 20, PEEP of 10, and you know, FiO2 flow. We'll talk about the flow. Let's say is 60 liters per minute, which is fast, but this is just for the problem, all right? So I'll put this flow down here. Flow 60 liters per minute. Okay, and what I want you guys to do at home is I want you to try to draw these curves, okay? And let's say we have pressure control. Let's say we have pressure control of 20, respiratory rate 20. Let's say we have a PEEP also of 10, just to make them equal. And let's say we have an I time of 0.5 seconds. All right. So take a moment, draw these at home, and then, you know, I'll draw them for you. See if they match, you know, work on this. I can't explain how important this is, and this is the basis for which everything else is built upon. Okay, so try to draw this. All right, let's start with the pressure control because that's often, you know, a little bit easier for people. So, all right, so pressure, flow, pressure, flow. These are paralyzed patients, relatively, let's say, healthy lungs, and we want to know what they look like. First, which ones are the independent ones, so we know which ones to draw first. All right, this is the independent here, and this is the independent here. All right, so let's start with pressure control. All right, so first, where's it going to start? Here, PEEP of 10. All right, goes up 20, so really this will be 30. Some vents are different. Some vents, you know, I believe the Draeger vents, the number you set is actually the total, so you just have to know which. You know, most of the servos, I find that most of the vents the pressure control you put in is the pressure above PEEP. So that's how we're working this one. All right. How long does that pressure hold? 0.5 seconds. All right. That's the inspiratory time. Boom, it goes down. You know, how long is expiration? Well, you have a respiratory rate of 20. So that means in 60 seconds, each cycle of inspiration and expiration is 3 seconds. Okay. So how long will this be? Well, as it's set, this will be 2.5 seconds, you know, and that's what it'll look like. All right. 0.5, 0.5, 2.5. All right. What's your I to E ratio? Well, it's 0.5 to 2.5. All right, which you can simple out as 1 to 5. All right. That's right, 2.5, yeah. So that's your I to E ratio. Okay, let's see what the flow curve will look like. Well, no flow. This is not drawn good, but you get the gist. All right, so that's the flow curve. All right, now let's do volume control, which always tends to be a little bit more confusing, but let's start with the independent one, all right? So right here, we're at end of expiration. There's no flow. Inspiration, boom, there's flow. You know, if you looked and actually saw where this flow is, it'd be at, you know, 60, what we said, 60 liters per minute. And how long is this going to be? Well, at 60 liters a minute, right? So that's 1 liter per second. We want 500 cc's or 0.5 liters. So this is going to be 0.5 seconds. All right. That's going to be the inspiration. All right. Oops. You know, and that's what it's going to look like. You know, again, this will be, you know, we have respiratory rate of 20, just like in that problem. The whole cycle is 3 seconds. You know, so this is going to be 2.5, 0.5, 2.5. You know, what's our I to E ratio? Same thing, 0.5 to 2.5, you know, which is 1 to 5, all right? So we actually have the same I to E ratios in both. Let's talk about what the pressure curve is going to look like. Again, initially there's going to be, you know, you're going to start at PEEP, which is 10. There's initially going to be a little blip, which is the resistance, and, you know, we'll talk about, you know, if there are alterations in this in the next section, but essentially, you know, it should be going up as you're pushing more flow in. The ventilator has to provide more pressure to get the flow in, all right? Again, here's your peak inspiratory pressure. What is that? Well, you don't know. The vent will tell you. That is a dependent variable, all right? It's not like this where you know what your peak, you actually set your peak inspiratory pressure, but here you'll be able to see that on the vent, all right? Again, if you want a plateau pressure, you'd have to do a little hold like that, which would allow a hold like that, all right? Those are the normal scalars. Practice them, write them, do it 100 times before you go to the next section. You should be able to look across the room and see if you're on a pressure or volume controlled mode. All right. We'll just quickly, right before we end this section, I'll just talk about this because it's confused. PRVC. All right. This is a pressure regulated volume control. Pressure regulated volume control. All right. What kind of mode is this? All right. I will tell you that you set a volume, but I will tell you that this is what the curves look like. So you set the volume. Is this a pressure mode or is it a volume mode? Well, look at the curves. This is the control variable by which flow gets in. All right, this is a pressure mode. All right, you set the volume and the vent adjusts the pressure in order to achieve that volume, but it is a pressure control mode. All right, that is to say, if I want 500 cc's, the vent will, in a smart way, will look back at the last couple of breaths, and if it set it to a pressure of 15 here, and that only gave you, a volume of 400, then the next one, or after the next couple, will get higher. All right, so in fact, and that's how it will do that until it adjusts your volume. So in fact, if I gave you a curve and I said, what mode could this be? Can it be regular? Well, it's a pressure control mode. Can it be regular pressure control? No. Why not? Well, because on a regular pressure control, you set a pressure, and all the pressures should be the same. So when you look at this, you'd say, this has got to be PRVC. It's a pressure controlled mode, and the ventilator is adjusting the pressure in order to achieve whatever volume, we set. 450, 500, 300, whatever we set. Okay? Those are the normal scalars. Really practice them. And then you'll be set to go on to the next section, which is pulmonary mechanics, and we'll discuss the equation of motion.